lovely people. Today I thought I would give you a little roundup of my 2024 Read the World project.
Sophie vlogs.
I think I started trying to read the world like actively in about October 2023, I believe. So in 2024, I set myself the goal of reading one book a month. So it would have been 12 total, and I did 17. So I thought I would just do like a quick roundup all in one place, as opposed to all of my like monthly wrap ups of all the books I read and how I got on with them. I have read 79 countries in total now, so I'm not going to do a full list of what those countries are because I will be here for a while and I think that might be quite boring. So these are in no particular order, they're just in the order in which I wrote them down in my little notebook, so I will just chat you through them. First up for Bahrain, I read Voyage of the Lost and Found by Aisha Bushby. This is a very sweet children's book, probably middle grade, I would say, that is about a young girl who lives on a boat with her two mums, and she has like a little creature who's like sort of like her familiar thing. She's the only person she knows who has one of these, and then one day she meets this boy who also has one, and sort of an adventure happens. I remember this being a very sweet middle grade. I think it had a lot of really lovely moments that I could see were like teaching children how to handle certain topics, like the main character's familiar sort of shows up when she gets angry about things, and I could really see like the emotional learning techniques that the book is like trying to help children get towards, and I remember thinking that was really fab. It also handles some stuff like she ends up having her first period on this, and I think that was handled in a really nice like age appropriate way. It had a lot of storytelling in it as well, like there's lots of tales being told that end up being relevant to the plot. I just thought it was a really adorable middle grade book. Guyana, I read The Longest Memory by Fred Dagois. This again was like a really well written book. I found it very emotionally affecting. It is from lots of different perspectives. So every chapter is from pretty much a different perspective. Sometimes you return to the same perspective, and it kind of hinges around a young enslaved man on a plantation who was killed, and you get to see the sort of ripples of that action and how they affect lots of different people. It kind of flips around in time as well, so you get to see like moments very far back, and it's one of those ones where as you read each new perspective you get glimpses of knowledge and you end up being able to piece together a lot more of a fuller picture than the actual people in the book ever have. I thought it was really well written. I thought it was very affecting. That was another one that I thought was a objectively like well written book. For Bolivia, I read What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez, which is set in Egypt in like the 1800s, and you follow someone who is the daughter of archaeologists. Her parents have disappeared. She's taken herself to Egypt against her uncle's wishes to investigate the disappearance of her parents. There's this romance with this guy. They're like doing some archaeology, uncovering some mysteries. I really wanted to love this book. I thought that it sounded like something that was going to be very up my street. I personally didn't love the execution of it. I felt like it was trying to do a lot of things. I didn't love how it did any of them. I didn't care for the romance at all. I just found the characters' decision making annoying. That one was not actually for me, but you don't know until you read things, do you? For Serbia, I read Walk Through Walls, which is Marina Abramovic's memoir. Marina Abramovic is like a performance artist who is very well known. I have always never really understood performance art, or rather like I've always thought that I don't, and then back when I was in uni like a decade ago, I did a bit of an art history dabble and we talked about Marina Abramovic, some of her work, and I felt like when I was hearing what lecturers were saying, like it did really help me get a better understanding of it. So I was interested to read this to sort of get even more of an understanding about like her process and her art and all that kind of thing. And I definitely did get that. I understand a lot more about when you hear things described sometimes versus experiencing it at the performance. I think sometimes it can be hard to understand what purpose it fulfills, whereas reading this memoir, I understand a lot more about her background and how she came to be who she is, and therefore I understand a lot more about what influences her artwork. I think her artwork just leans too much on like self-mutilation for me to ever actually really like it. And that's always a discussion, isn't it, with art? Like, does it matter if you like art? Like, liking something versus like something being a powerful statement. And I do appreciate that. I think she's never going to be an artist that I'm like, oh wow, love her. I liked the first half of the narrative a bit more than the second half. I remember thinking, I think I felt like it was a lot more, gave a lot more of herself in the earlier parts. There's also some dodgy stuff to do with how she talks about Aboriginal people as well that was a bit iffy. But I think it served the purpose of, I do understand her better. I don't ever think that she's going to be a favourite artist though. For Malta and also for Deweython, I read The Hiding Place by Trezza Azzopardi because Trezza Azzopardi is a Maltese author, but this is looking at the Maltese community that was in Tiger Bay in the 1960s in Cardiff. And so I read it for Deweython, which is a readathon that's all about reading Welsh books and books set in Wales. It was interesting insight into what that community was like in the 60s. It was a very hard time, and the narrative is dealing with a lot of very heavy topics. The narrative framing is kind of like you're following this family and you're from the perspective of the youngest child, and she is injured in a house fire, and so she's got a lot of scarring, and as such they keep her away from the world a lot. So sort of the narrative structure is that she is an adult, and then like she's going back as an adult, and then you pick it up from her child perspective. But I found the perspective gave me like a bit of a distance sometimes from the narrative. Like there's a lot of like really emotionally fraught things happening, but because you're viewing it from this like child who doesn't really understand everything but also isn't always present for everything, I found myself reading it being like, I should feel more emotionally affected by this moment than I am. I felt like I had a bit of a distance from it. Many people didn't. Many people found it very emotionally affecting, and you might be one of them. That was just my experience reading it, but it was interesting from sort of like a historic perspective. I kind of wish that I had maybe had a bit more that was about like the Maltese community and rather than like interpersonal family dramas. I have Samoa. I read Bloody Woman by Lana Lopesi. This is kind of a set of like non-fiction essays. They're circling around lots of different topics. The title comes from, there's a real like through thread of she keeps having like bleeds and heavy periods and that kind of thing, and there's a lot to do with like womanhood and her Samoan identity. Reminded me, I felt like I had a bit of a reading moment actually, because I read this one and I also read, can't remember it. I'm going to put the cover up here. There was another book that I read that was from a completely different perspective. This one was from an Indigenous American perspective. But they had Heartberries by Marie-Therese something. They both felt like they were exploring in from different places, but like Indigenous identity, womanhood, trauma. Like there was just like I read them in like the same month, I think, and they had a real conversation to them. The Bloody Woman also reminds me a lot of Poukahangatus by another author who I'm not remembering. I'll also put that up here somewhere, who is she's New Zealand but also has some Samoan ancestry, I believe. Those are poems, and those poems didn't wholly hit for me because they weren't like a poetic style. I think I didn't get a lot of the references, to be honest with you. You know when you're like, I'm really glad this poem collection exists because people need it, but I'm not the person who like connects to it. So there was like a bit of like a reading moment there with like those. They felt like they were all in like a bit of a conversation with each other. That's always interesting, I think, when that happens. Zimbabwe, I read Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga. I loved this book. This was so good. I really want to continue the series. We are following, I don't remember any main character names pretty much after I finish books. I'm so sorry. So everyone is going to be referred to as the main character. We follow this main character who is it opens with like this iconic line that was like, and I'm going to butcher it because I can't remember it specifically, but it was like, I was not sad when my brother died. And you get this understanding of why this, when she was a child, why she wasn't sad when her brother died. And like, she's a child who has such ambition and such yearning, and she like she's intelligent, she wants to show everyone that she is, and she's constantly being limited by the fact that she is a girl and she has this brother who gets everything that she wants. And then obviously you know that he dies, and then you get to see the effect of his death upon her family. You get to see she gets to sort of like take his place. It was really, I felt so rooted. I loved the relationship between her and her cousin. They feel like her cousin grew up partially in England, so has come back and is very different from the other children and is like a bit of an outsider. And her cousin, I found her cousin so compelling. Her cousin is really being like crushed by this like torn identity. I just thought it was brilliant. I really want to read the second book. I want to get my hands on it next year. That's one of my 2025 reading goals. Finland, I listened to Notes from an Island by Tove Jansson. Probably not the best place to start with Tove Jansson. I should have read anything else, but this was like a collaboration between Tove Jansson and her partner. She did lots of illustrations, so again, I kind of wish that I'd read it because I didn't realise there were like these illustrations. But it's just about this like account of them, this little island that they would go stay at. They had like a little like tiny little house on it, and it spans quite a large amount of time between like when this island represents like freedom to them and like this isolation is like really freeing, versus like as they get older and they realise that like they don't have the capacity to do all of the upkeep and everything anymore, and they're going to have to leave this life behind them. It was a really lovely like snapshot. It has made me want to read Tove Jansson's work. I just kind of wish that I'd already had more of a sense of her before I read it, and I think maybe then I would have like appreciated it a bit more. For Myanmar, I read Shalimar by Davina Quinlivan. I counted this for Myanmar. There are lots of different sort of threads in this book, and it is that she has this Burmese heritage, and that's like a real thread at one point. There is also like she's got Irish heritage, she's got Indian heritage, so a lot of it's like a memoir. So there are different family members who get explored, and you get to sort of it's got a subheading, and can I remember the subheading? No, but the subheading is like 3 different words that really encompass what it is. It'll be here somewhere. It was a very reflective book. I ended up reading it all in one go on a bus journey, and I kind of wish that I hadn't. You know, you pack a book and you're like, I'm going on a journey. I guess I'll read this book. And then you realise partway through, I was like, this is a book that I would recommend dipping in and out of. I wish that I had been able to take my time with it. It was the only entertainment I had, so I just read the whole thing. But with hindsight, I kind of wish that I'd done like a chapter at a time, spread out, and I could really like reflect on it, because it's doing that thing that I really enjoy that memoirs do, where it weaves together so many different things that are rooted in personal family experience, but are exploring like history, migration, nature, like all of that kind of thing. I found the bits that most affected me were like this one family member, I think it was her aunt, I can't remember the exact relationship, and it was like her aunt was brought up very strictly, and so her aunt like taught her how to do all of the things that she didn't get to do, that she was like told that she couldn't do. It was like really important to her that this child got to like have those little rebellions and stuff. And she talks about grief and loss in a way that I found really moving, and it made me think of like the family members that I've lost and all that kind of thing. So I really liked that aspect of it. I wish that I had not done it all in one go. Venezuela, I read It Would Be Night in Caracas by Karina Sainz-Borjo. This one I thought I was going to really love, and it was fine, but it didn't affect me as much as I wanted it to. It is about a woman who has very recently lost her mother. Like, she has just buried her. At this moment in time in Venezuela where like politically things were very difficult, and there was a lot of societal like breakdown and everything. So it's like, I liked it at the start because she's unmoored by grief, and then like her undoing is being reflected in like the undoing of society and all this kind of thing. The plot ends up like wibbling around a bunch of places, and for me, I felt like the plot kind of, you know, when things are happening and you're like, everything is just a random event and a random event. I don't know. I didn't feel like I think maybe I lost my rooting. Maybe that's because she's lost her rooting. I don't know. It was one of those ones where I didn't feel wholly satisfied when I finished it. I know a lot about Venezuela, so it was so I learned a lot from reading like this moment in time, but I wanted a bit more like narratively from the fiction of the book. Portugal, I read I Have More Souls Than One by Fernando Pessoa. This was like one of those little tiny Penguin Modern collections. So it had an excerpt from I Have More Souls Than One, and it had some of his other poetry. I have since listened to an In Our Time episode on Fernando Pessoa, and I find myself even more interested in him. I did not know how many different pen names he had. So he would write under different pen names, and he would construct like completely different fictional biographies for every different pen name. So different pen names would be writing literature that was just like in completely different style, and like people thought that these were people who existed because they were published under these different names. Wild to me. Found that so interesting. I really want to learn more about his life. I loved this poetry collection. I want to get my hands on like a full poetry collection by him. There was definitely like, it reminded me a bit of like Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman in like I Have More Souls Than One, this plurality. And at the time that I read it, I didn't know about all of these like constructed personas that he wrote through. So I was reading it like a bit like Leaves of Grass, with that like, you know, plurality of experience and all that kind of thing, which I do think still stands. But also now knowing that there was very like literally like a plurality of self, like he split himself into all these different people, like, boy, I just need to explore it more. But I loved the poetry. It was very reflective. I really, really want to explore him more. That's the main point to take away from that. Ethiopia, I read The Shadow King by Maza Mengiste, which is a historical fiction. It's exploring the portion of Ethiopian history where, what's his face? The Italian guy. Oh God, Sophie. Invaded Ethiopia, and then the Ethiopian resistance fought back against him. This is largely, it's got a couple of different perspectives actually, but the sort of main perspective that you're with is this girl who has become a servant to this family, and then she ends up it's like the perspective, like the women who were part of this resistance who were often overlooked. I think mainly there is a little bit of a thing with how the book is marketed. Is the book is marketed like you're going to be getting this history of these women that are usually really overlooked, but actually like I wanted that to be much more of the focus. It is interesting because you get to see this girl's experience as very different to the wife of the guy that she is a servant to, who that woman really like, she's very well off and she like sheds that side of herself and she really absorbs becoming this like leader. So that was really interesting. There's another character who's like a photographer who photographs a lot of the Italian atrocities and like all that kind of thing. My main remembrance of this was that I just remembered being a bit disappointed that there wasn't so much focus on the women. Like most of the women don't have names, most of the women are not really focused on, and I maybe that is where, like, you know, like a book is marketed to you a certain way and then it's not actually what the book is. And sometimes it's like, I don't mean to punish a book for not being what I thought it was going to be, but I feel a little bit tricked by marketing. St. Kitts, I read Crossing the River by Carol Phillips. This is, oh God, how many parts is it split into? I want to say 3 or 4. And they are interlinked, but you could read them as like separate short stories, and it is about a father who chooses to sell his children into slavery, and then you see the descendants of you see the impact of that in these different short stories. I remember feeling that the 4, like, I liked some of I think I liked the first story more than the others. That might not be the correct way round. I remember wanting them to feel more cohesively together, but I did wonder if that ever so slight like distance aspect in how these narratives came together is deliberate, because the whole point is that these children have been torn away and they are separated, and that like that home is no longer together. So I kind of wondered if it was like a deliberate stylistic choice to sort of reflect the nature of the narrative that you are having. That's my main memory from that one. For Sri Lanka, I listened to The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida by Shehan Karunatilaka. I really loved this. I'm really glad I listened to this. This was one audiobook where I was like, yes, this was the guy who narrated it. I will put here, he will be in the description below. Like the voices, the narration style, like I just think he delivered it really well. You get to see a lot of the like fallout from the Sri Lankan Civil War. We follow Maali Almeida, who has died, and it's like he was a war photographer, and it's like before he goes on to the next stage, like his spirit has these options of like what he wants to do, and so he's kind of trying to solve who killed him, but you get to see like both this spirit realm and then like what is happening in the real world, like as other people also try and figure out like what happened to him, because for a while they just think he's disappeared. I really enjoyed it. I loved the sort of spirit world side of things. I do think that I had a really good experience listening to the audiobook. I think that that really brought it alive for me. It's the reason why I read Seasons of Trouble for Nonfiction November, cover up here, is because this showed you some aspects of Sri Lanka Civil War, and I wanted to get a little bit better understanding. That book, Seasons of Trouble, is it's like a piece of journalistic nonfiction, and it follows 3 people specifically, and you get to see one of them is someone who is suspected of being part of the Tamil Tigers, so is abducted by the police. Another person is his mother, who is working tirelessly to free him, and then the third perspective is someone who is involved with the Tamil Tigers in a different part of Sri Lanka, and then you get to see how their lives went. It was a very immersive piece of non-fiction. At times it was easy to forget that it was non-fiction, because I think that the author did a really good job of like rooting you in each person's like thought process and like how they were feeling at the time and everything like that. I thought it was a really great piece of non-fiction. Highland, I read The Moon Represents My Heart by Pim Wantekawat. I really wanted to love this more than I did. I read this as part of Asian Readathon, and if you want to hear my full thoughts, go listen to that one. It's a family who have the ability to time travel, but their time travel is like very, very specific. Like one of them can only go to the 1940s, and one of them can only go to like places where family members are. So that was like an interesting concept. I thought that it was trying to do a lot of things and it didn't land it for me. There were a few things where I still don't know if the resolution to certain plot lines was given to us and I missed it, or it was just never given to us. I cannot work that out. And I liked aspects of it. I felt like there's a sense of loss at the heart of it, because like these 2 children whose parents can do the time traveling, like they disappear, and then there's like this loss, like this void in the text that like haunts it. And this look at like generational, like, again, it's one of those ones that because of different people, like the information different people are able to access, like you as the viewer end up being like the holder of knowledge, and you get to see like that expounds on the loss sometimes, because you're like, I have the solution to the thing that is haunting you, all that kind of thing. And I did like those things. I just felt like it didn't really come together, and some of it was written in sort of like a free verse way, and I didn't think the free verse added anything. I don't understand free verse, maybe, because sometimes free verse I'm just like, this is just a sentence and you have just put line breaks in it, and I don't understand that. Maybe that's a me problem. Penultimately, for Romania, I read Women by Mihail Sebastian. This is a set of 4 short stories that are kind of interconnected. We're following the same man. Every short story is named after a woman that he has a relationship with. And so it's like 4 snapshots of his life. One of them is from the perspective of the woman. All the other 3 are from his perspective. I liked the first story a lot. I thought it really had, it's like he's on holiday in the Alps. It has this really like lazy, hazy summer vibe. And there are like 3 different women that he is like kind of trying to be involved with, just different levels of success, and I really liked that one. I disliked the second story so much. The third story that is from the perspective of like the woman, I enjoyed more because I felt like she had a very distinct voice and tone. And then the 4th story was like, I liked the very end of it, but the rest of it was not super interesting to me. So it was one of those ones where I think that first story and the third story are going to really stay in my mind quite distinctly. I think maybe I'm going to lose the details of the others as time goes on. So it hasn't made me want to read more Mihail Sebastian, but I didn't like dislike it. It's just not my fave. Finally, for Syria, I read The Frightened Ones by Dima Wanu, which is a 2 perspectives. It is one of them is a woman who this guy that she's involved with has left Syria without telling her, and she finds his manuscript that he's been writing, and at first she thinks that he's writing it about her, because although the biographical information in it is different, the core sense of that person feels very true to her. And so you kind of follow her. Like, she's having a hard time already. They met because they both go to the same therapist. Like, she's dealing with a lot of trauma, and I think that her plotline I enjoyed. It was the manuscript plotline I didn't like so much. I found the writing really juvenile. I just didn't care for the manuscript part of it. And it's difficult when a text tells you that, like, when a text tells you that, like, a book is really good, and then it gives you excerpts of the book and you don't think it's that good. It's always a bit weird, isn't it? Because you're like, but you keep telling me that this guy is an amazing writer, and then I read his writing and I'm like, is he though? What I think it did a really good job of is showing the impact of living through war and instability and how much that affects you. Like, she feels all of that discussion with regards to that person. I felt that really strongly, and I think that's why when we went to this manuscript narrative, it didn't feel as authentic. That's just the run through of the 17 books I have read this year for my Read the World challenge. To look ahead to 2025, I have 3 books currently that I have lined up to read. I will be trying to get my hands on more. I have some plotted in for what I want to get. The first of those is Written in Black by K.H. Lim. This is for Brunei. We follow a 10-year-old Jonathan who, his mother has left for Australia, his brother has left to go join a rock band, and he's at his grandfather's funeral. And it sounds very surreal. It's like he takes his grandfather's coffin and he rides it down the river to go find his brother and convince him to come back, and his mother to find out what happened to her, because otherwise it's just him left with his angry father. It kind of, from the blurb, sounds like it might be like almost like dreamlike, a little bit surreal in like the type of journey he's having. Like, is it real, or is it like interpreting events that are happening? I don't know. So that was one that I've got on my Kindle. 2 that I have physically is My Father's Daughter by Hannah Azib Paul. This is for Eritrea. This is a non-fiction, and it's about the author who found a letter that sort of unravelled everything that she knew about her family history, and then she takes us with us on her journey as she travels to Eritrea to like uncover her story. What the letter reveals is that she was adopted, but it turns out that it's a letter from her brother that is saying that her family is alive and they're desperate to meet her. So it's like she's going to meet this family that she has never met. And then the third one is also non-fiction, because I am loving non-fiction at the moment. This is The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich. This was written during the Soviet Union. Where she is from is now Belarus. It's like a journalistic account of the women who were involved in these conflicts, who were like told that they weren't allowed to speak out about their experiences. So she spent a lot of time interviewing women from the Soviet Union who fought in the Second World War, and then has sort of like woven their voices together into this, I believe. So yeah, those are just the 3 books that I have planned to definitely tackle in 2025. I will be continuing this. I would like to set myself the same goal of reading 12 as like my minimum, so then it's like 1 a month. Yeah, if you have any recommendations, I would always love to hear them. I've said it a couple of times, but like what my point of doing Read the World is that I'm trying to introduce myself to authors and books that I might not ordinarily stumble upon, and discover new favourites that I can then go off and read further. I've definitely had that this year, you know, hearing me talk about some of those. Like, there are people there that I really want to go and explore more works that they've written. So even if it's for a country that I've already read for, like, I'm not just planning to read like 1 book for every country and then just never read anything else from them again. I would like to discover new authors and new favourite books. So yes, I would love to hear from you. Have you been taking part in Read the World? How's it going? What have been your favourite books? Have you discovered that you particularly like literature from any particular country? Like, anything you want to chat about, please do feel free to leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from everyone. Otherwise, I hope you're having a really lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.